Elijah had always been a quiet man, the kind of person people noticed only if they needed something or if he offered a smile as he passed by. His house sat at the end of a small street, with a neat garden and a white picket fence that gave the impression of a peaceful, ordinary life. On any other day, he would be seen tending to his plants, walking his dog, or fixing small things around the house. To the neighbors, he seemed calm, approachable, and harmless. No one would have guessed that behind his calm exterior was a man with a past filled with danger, discipline, and skills that few could even imagine. Elijah worked a normal job at a local shipping company. He drove a truck during the day and returned home to his quiet routine. He never talked about his past, and he never let anyone in too close. It wasn't that he didn't like people. He just knew the value of keeping the past private. There were things he had done, missions he had survived, that could put both him and others at risk if spoken about. So he lived quietly, blending into the background, careful not to draw attention. The peace of his life began to crack one evening, when a group of men started targeting his neighborhood. At first it was small things: trash left on his lawn, graffiti on his fence, and rude notes pushed under his door. Elijah noticed, of course, but he did not panic. He was not a man who overreacted. He observed quietly, taking mental notes of who was involved and how they operated. He understood that aggression often came from weakness, from people trying to feel powerful where they could. The first time he saw the men, they were laughing loudly across the street, pointing at his house as they threw a few stones onto the lawn. Elijah stood on his porch, arms crossed, and watched. He did not yell or call the police immediately. Instead, he studied them, memorizing their faces, the way they walked, their reactions to each other. There was no fear in him, only calculation. He knew that rushing into anger could cost him more than just pride. It could make him vulnerable. Over the next few weeks, the harassment escalated. Broken windows appeared overnight, and graffiti returned, more aggressive this time. The men left threats, crude words scrawled across his walls, and letters slipped under doors. Some neighbors began whispering among themselves, unsure of what to do. Some suggested he call the police, while others assumed he had done something to provoke the attacks. But Elijah did not need advice or suggestions. He had faced worse, far worse, and he knew patience was as important as action. Elijah's dog, a large, loyal Labrador named Duke, stayed close to him during these days. Duke sensed the tension, always alert, tail low but ready. Elijah patted Duke's head, his voice calm and steady, as if to remind them both that fear would not control them. Duke was more than a companion. He was a partner in vigilance, a living presence that reminded Elijah that he was not entirely alone. One night, the situation reached a peak. Elijah returned from work to find the gate smashed open, the fence torn down, and smoke rising from the backyard. His house, his sanctuary, was burning. The gang had gone too far. The sight of flames reflecting in the windows should have provoked panic in anyone, but Elijah remained unnervingly calm. He did not run or scream. Instead, he assessed the damage quickly, noting the entry points, the extent of destruction, and the weaknesses in his defenses. Every skill he had learned, every moment of training and survival in dangerous places, guided his mind as he planned his next moves. Neighbors gathered, shouting and pointing, some taking videos on their phones. Elijah stepped out of the smoke and chaos with Duke at his side, not in panic but with a presence that made people pause. There was something in his calm, unshakable demeanor that made the crowd quiet. They could see the fire, the destruction, and yet here he was, composed, observing everything as if calculating every step of a plan they could not even begin to understand. The authorities arrived soon after. Elijah spoke to them with a measured tone, explaining the situation without exaggeration. He handed over what evidence he could collect at the moment, photographs of previous harassment and descriptions of the men. But he did not rely entirely on them. He knew that the gang had underestimated him, and he intended to use that to his advantage. In the following days, Elijah worked tirelessly. He secured the perimeter, set up cameras in hidden spots, and reinforced doors and windows. He worked quietly, methodically, ensuring that any future attempts could be documented and countered. He even began to study the gang's behavior, watching from a distance as they continued to act recklessly, thinking he was defeated or vulnerable. Neighbors began to notice small changes. Elijah's calm, almost eerie focus as he rebuilt and reinforced his property drew attention. Some whispered that perhaps he was more capable than anyone had realized. Others, however, remained suspicious or fearful, unsure of the man they had assumed was just another quiet neighbor. Still, no one knew the full story, the depth of skill and experience behind the serene exterior. Elijah also spent time with Duke, taking long walks to clear his mind and maintain a sense of normalcy. During these walks, he observed the neighborhood, noting any patterns in the gang's movements, listening for any sign that they were planning another attack. He was patient, knowing that control and strategy would be more effective than reacting with anger or emotion. Every step was part of a larger plan, a carefully measured response that would ultimately ensure that justice was done and the threat was neutralized. He reflected on his past during these moments of calm. The missions he had survived, the dangers he had faced, and the people he had lost were never far from his mind. They had shaped him into a man who understood patience, strategy, and the value of preparation. He knew that rushing into action without information would be a mistake. He also knew that this moment, while smaller than the battles he had fought, required the same discipline and calm focus that had saved him countless times before. In the evenings, he would sit on his porch, Duke by his side, watching the street with quiet vigilance. The smoke from the fire had cleared, but the memory of destruction lingered. He did not dwell on anger or revenge. He planned, observed, and waited. The gang had made a mistake in underestimating him, and he intended to use that error to its fullest extent. As the days passed, Elijah continued to rebuild, reinforcing not only his home but his sense of control. He knew that eventually the gang would make another move, and when they did, he would be ready. Every moment of preparation, every observation, every careful adjustment to his defenses brought him closer to a position of advantage. He did not need to rush. He only needed to wait for the right time to act. The neighborhood began to sense a shift. The whispers changed from fear and suspicion to curiosity and, in some cases, admiration. They did not know what he had endured or what he was capable of, but there was a presence about him now that commanded respect. Elijah remained quiet, letting his actions speak louder than words. He rebuilt his home not just as a place to live, but as a symbol of resilience and calculated strength. Through it all, Elijah remained grounded. He knew that his strength came not from the past alone, but from how he chose to respond in the present. He remained vigilant, calm, and patient, understanding that the moment of true confrontation had not yet come. Every day was a step in preparation, every observation a piece of a larger puzzle. And though the gang believed they had instilled fear, Elijah remained unshaken, ready for the day when he would finally take control of the situation. The quiet man at the end of the street, tending to his garden and walking his dog, was not as ordinary as anyone thought. The fire, the destruction, and the harassment were only the beginning. And Elijah, the calm, calculating, unshakable man, was preparing for the day when he would show just how dangerous he truly was. In the days following the destruction of his home, Elijah moved with a quiet determination that no one in the neighborhood could fully understand. He walked the street each morning, Duke at his side, noting every detail, every person who came and went. He checked the cameras he had installed, reviewing hours of footage to learn about the gang's movements and routines. He knew every second counted, and that patience would be more valuable than anger. Elijah's neighbors spoke in hushed tones about what had happened. Some assumed the worst about the man they barely knew. Others whispered about calling the police again or hiring security. Elijah remained composed, never once raising his voice, never once showing the kind of fear they thought he should have. There was something about him that demanded attention without demanding it, a calm confidence that made people pause. Inside his temporary living space, he made careful plans. He did not rush to rebuild his house completely. Instead, he reinforced what could be saved and documented every damage in detail. Every wall that could be repaired was strengthened, every lock double-checked, and every entry point analyzed for weaknesses. He wanted to be ready for any attempt to come again, and he wanted to ensure that the next time, the gang would face consequences they did not expect. Elijah spent time reflecting on his own reactions. He knew he could act violently if needed, but he also knew that being calculated and strategic would give him the upper hand. His mind replayed past missions where patience and observation had saved lives. He thought about the gang not as people to fear, but as a challenge to be understood and controlled. He believed that real strength was in preparation and precision, not reckless action. Each day he observed the neighborhood quietly. The gang members were brazen in their confidence, acting as if he had been defeated. Elijah noticed patterns in their movements, their habits, and even their interactions with each other. He realized that they were careless, relying on fear and intimidation to control others. Their arrogance would be their weakness. He watched from a distance, taking mental notes on who the leaders were, who the followers were, and how they communicated. Every small detail added to the larger picture he was building in his mind. While the gang remained unaware of his intentions, Elijah also worked on maintaining the trust of the few neighbors who still respected him. He offered assistance where he could, helped with small repairs, and made gestures that reminded people that he was not defined by the attacks against him. He did this without seeking attention, simply to maintain a sense of normalcy and to ensure that any plans he carried out would not harm innocent people. Elijah also dedicated time to physical training. Although his body was already conditioned from years in the Navy SEALs, he knew that staying sharp was essential. He ran along the streets, lifted weights in his temporary garage setup, and practiced drills in the backyard. Duke accompanied him, a constant reminder that even in preparation there could be moments of calm and companionship. The exercise kept his mind clear and ready, balancing the tension of the situation with focus and control. He began setting subtle defenses around his property. Nothing obvious that would provoke the gang, but measures that would allow him to observe and manage any future confrontation. He marked areas for cameras, created safe zones, and prepared escape routes. He practiced how he could move quickly and efficiently without panic, understanding that control of the environment would be key. As he watched, Elijah also considered the psychological aspects of the gang. He knew that fear, pride, and overconfidence could be manipulated. He thought about how to make them reveal themselves, how to create situations where their mistakes would become obvious, and how to ensure that they underestimated him just as much as he needed them to. Every day he refined these strategies, as if playing a game of chess where each move counted far more than it appeared. Despite all the planning, Elijah made time for the small joys of life. He repaired a small section of the garden, walked Duke at sunset, and even spoke briefly with neighbors who stopped to check in. These moments kept him grounded, reminded him of the life he was protecting, and maintained the sense of normalcy he needed to stay focused. He knew that losing sight of the life he loved would only weaken his resolve. The gang's boldness continued, as if they thought their earlier destruction had gone unpunished. They moved carelessly, laughing and mocking what they believed was his fear. Elijah watched silently, never showing reaction, letting their arrogance build. He learned names, faces, and behaviors. He took mental notes on the sounds they made when approaching, the times they preferred, and even the routes they chose. All of it added to the plan he was carefully building in his mind. A plan that would not be reckless but precise and effective. There were nights when Elijah could not sleep, nights when he walked the perimeter, Duke following silently, listening to every noise, feeling the rhythm of the neighborhood. He imagined scenarios, considered outcomes, and refined his strategies. He did not allow anger to control him. He allowed observation, preparation, and calculation to guide his actions. Every sound, every movement became data he could use to protect himself and to ensure the gang would not succeed again. The local authorities offered help, but Elijah did not rely solely on them. He knew that their involvement could slow action or even alert the gang to his own plans. He cooperated, of course, providing evidence and statements, but he understood that ultimate control had to be his. He was aware of the law and respected it, but he also knew that justice often required preparation and careful execution. Neighbors began to sense a change in the atmosphere. Elijah's calm determination was noticeable, even if they did not understand it fully. They saw a man who had suffered great loss but remained composed, a man who seemed to command respect without asking for it. Whispers began to circulate, some admiring, some fearful, all curious about the man who could endure so much and remain so steady. In quiet moments, Elijah thought about the future. He imagined the confrontation when it would come, how he would act, and how he could protect the neighborhood and himself. He knew the gang would return, that their arrogance would drive them to try again. He did not hope for it. He prepared for it. Every measure he took, every observation, and every training session was building toward a moment where he would take control, not recklessly, but strategically. Elijah's preparation extended beyond physical and tactical measures. He thought about the psychological impact of his actions, the importance of remaining calm under pressure, and the value of letting the gang underestimate him at every step. His patience became a weapon in itself, and his composure became a shield that no force could break. Even as life continued around him, with neighbors going about their daily routines and the gang plotting their next moves, Elijah remained focused. He knew that patience, observation, and careful planning would ultimately give him the upper hand. Every small action, from repairing walls to reviewing camera footage, was part of a larger strategy, a strategy that would ensure that justice was served without unnecessary violence or risk. As part 2 comes to a close, Elijah is fully immersed in his preparation. His home, though damaged, is becoming a fortified space, his mind sharp and ready and his patience unshakable. The gang remains unaware of the storm that is quietly building, a storm led by a man who has survived far greater dangers than they could ever imagine. And though the neighborhood watches with curiosity and speculation, Elijah knows that the moment of reckoning will come, and when it does, he will be ready, calm, and unstoppable. Elijah knew that watching and waiting alone would not be enough. The gang had grown bolder, and he needed to shift from defense to careful strategy. He began to set subtle countermeasures, small traps that would reveal the gang's movements without putting him at risk. Each step was planned with precision, a test to gauge their confidence and to make them underestimate him even more. He observed the gang over several days, noting how they approached the neighborhood. They had patterns, repeated behaviors that could be exploited. Elijah used hidden cameras to record these actions, studying the footage late into the night. He noticed when they laughed carelessly, when they signaled to each other, and when they assumed no one was watching. Every detail became part of his mental map of their weaknesses. Elijah's neighbors continued their daily routines, mostly unaware of the planning happening in the house that had once been burned. Some remained wary, some curious, but none knew the full story. Elijah kept his interactions brief but kind, offering small gestures of friendliness while remaining focused on the larger plan. His calm demeanor made it difficult for anyone to suspect the depth of his preparation. He spent hours thinking through every possible scenario. What if they tried to intimidate him again? What if they attacked when no one was around? He imagined their moves, countering them in his mind, testing his reactions. Each scenario was rehearsed mentally, until the correct response became second nature. This was not just survival. It was a precise orchestration of strategy and patience. At the same time, Elijah reinforced the areas around his home. Windows were secured, gates reinforced, and hidden cameras placed in locations the gang could not see. He even created decoy spots, small areas that appeared vulnerable but were monitored closely. His goal was not to start a confrontation, but to control it entirely, making sure he could act decisively when the time came. Duke remained by his side through it all, a silent companion who sensed Elijah's focus and intensity. The dog's presence reminded him of loyalty, of calm, and of the life he was protecting. Walks became part of his observation, allowing him to monitor the neighborhood in a natural way. Even when the gang was nearby, Duke remained calm, reflecting the quiet confidence Elijah carried in every action. The gang, unaware of Elijah's observations, continued the reckless behavior. They mocked, they boasted, and they made mistakes in timing and coordination. Each mistake became valuable information. Elijah recorded these details, making note of the leaders, the followers, and the level of chaos among them. Their overconfidence would be a tool he could use, and he waited patiently for the perfect moment to act. Elijah also considered the psychological aspect of his strategy. He knew that fear and intimidation could be powerful weapons if used subtly. He planned to let the gang believe they were in control, to make them feel invincible, only to dismantle that illusion when the time was right. Every action, every reinforcement, every camera placement was part of a larger plan to manipulate their perception and force them into mistakes. In quiet moments, Elijah reflected on his own emotions. He did not allow anger to cloud his judgment. He knew the danger of reacting impulsively and allowed himself only to feel calm determination. This inner control became as important as any physical preparation. He had survived missions in far more dangerous situations, and he understood that composure and clarity were often the difference between success and failure. During the day, Elijah sometimes interacted with the gang indirectly. He noticed them at a distance, observing their behavior and studying their confidence. He used these observations to refine his approach, learning what kind of provocations they responded to, how they communicated, and how easily they could be distracted. Every small detail added to the strategy he was building meticulously. Nighttime became a key part of his preparation. Elijah reviewed camera footage, walked the perimeter silently, and tested his traps. He practiced movements, imagining scenarios where he might need to act quickly. Duke remained alert, always attentive to the slightest sound, as if he understood the tension in the air. Elijah's body and mind moved in harmony, trained for precision and readiness. He even began to prepare for the aftermath of any confrontation. Evidence collection, securing areas, and ensuring neighbors remained safe were all part of his plan. He thought ahead, knowing that controlling the situation meant controlling not just the confrontation itself, but everything around it. This foresight gave him confidence, a calm assurance that he could handle whatever came next. Small victories occurred along the way. The gang made mistakes, missteps, exposure of their identities, and moments of confusion that Elijah quietly noted. He never reacted immediately. Instead, he collected evidence and allowed their arrogance to grow. Each misstep strengthened his strategy, providing more information to ensure that when he finally acted, he would do so with precision. Neighbors began to sense subtle changes. The quiet man at the end of the street was no longer just quiet. He seemed deliberate, focused, and unyielding. Some admired his composure, some feared his intensity, and some simply wondered what he was planning. Elijah remained polite and measured, never revealing more than necessary. His reputation for calmness began to shift subtly toward a sense of respect and cautious curiosity. Elijah also prepared for communication challenges. He considered how the gang might attempt to provoke a response, how they might try to manipulate neighbors or authorities, and how he could maintain control of the narrative. Every interaction, direct or indirect, became a calculated part of his plan. He ensured that any message he sent, even unintentionally, conveyed calm, control, and precision rather than anger or fear. As the gang continued their reckless behavior, Elijah began laying the groundwork for the confrontation that he knew would eventually come. He prepared routes for observation, escape, and control, ensuring that every move could be executed without surprise. He practiced mental scenarios, imagining how each gang member might react, and planned responses that would give him complete dominance of the situation. Despite the tension, Elijah also maintained moments of personal grounding. He tended to the surviving parts of his garden, fixed minor items in his home, and spent time with Duke. These acts reminded him of the life he valued and the normalcy he was fighting to protect. They were small but essential, keeping him connected to his humanity even as he prepared for a dangerous confrontation. Elijah's observation revealed a critical insight. The gang's leadership was flawed. There was no discipline, no coordination, only ego and bravado. He realized that this flaw could be used strategically. By allowing them to act with overconfidence, he could set up situations where their own mistakes would expose them fully. Patience, he reminded himself, would turn their arrogance into their undoing. He also practiced restraint, understanding that the moment of action would require absolute control. He did not need to show his strength prematurely. He needed to act at the right time, when every piece of the plan was aligned. His patience was deliberate, a calculated aspect of his strategy that would ensure maximum effect with minimum risk. As days passed, Elijah's plan grew more complete. Every observation, every trap, every rehearsal brought him closer to the moment where he would act decisively. He knew that the gang would eventually attempt another attack, driven by pride and overconfidence. When that time came, he would be ready, calm, and in complete control. The neighborhood remained unaware of the depth of his preparation. They saw only a man quietly rebuilding, taking walks and living his life. They could not see the layers of strategy, the mental rehearsals, and the careful manipulations that Elijah had implemented. To them, he appeared calm. To him, he was preparing for a precise operation, one that would ensure the safety of his life, his property, and the community around him. In this way, Elijah moved through each day with quiet purpose, blending patience, observation, and strategy. His every action was deliberate, his every thought aligned with the eventual goal: to confront the gang with precision, control, and unstoppable force. He was calm, prepared, and quietly building the storm that would soon change everything for those who had underestimated him. The gang, confident in their previous actions, believed they had nothing to fear. They planned another attack, this time targeting Elijah directly, thinking they could intimidate him and finalize their control. What they did not realize was that Elijah had prepared every detail meticulously. Every entrance was monitored, every move recorded, and every potential reaction accounted for. Elijah moved calmly through his morning routine, Duke at his side, as he prepared for the day ahead. He checked the cameras once more, noting the gang's approach from the footage he had captured the night before. He had mapped their movements, identified the leaders, and even predicted the order in which they would arrive. Nothing about this confrontation would be left to chance. When the gang appeared, they were loud and arrogant, boasting as they moved through the streets. Elijah stayed inside, watching silently. He noticed their overconfidence, their careless communication, and their assumptions that he was still the frightened man they had once tried to bully. Each detail confirmed the strategy he had rehearsed for days. The gang reached the edge of his property, ready to act. Elijah made his first move, not with violence, but with controlled precision. Hidden alarms triggered subtle distractions, forcing the gang to split and move unpredictably. Every step he had predicted played out exactly as he expected, and he guided them carefully into areas where he had complete control. From the shadows, Elijah observed their confusion, noting how quickly panic began to replace arrogance. His preparation had forced the gang to act outside their comfort zone. He remained calm, knowing that patience would deliver the most impact. He did not need to rush. The situation was unfolding exactly as he had planned. Small maneuvers revealed the gang's weaknesses. Elijah watched as their leaders struggled to communicate, as followers hesitated, unsure of the environment. Every movement was under his observation. He had set up escape routes and barriers in advance, ensuring that any attempt to gain the upper hand would fail. This was not reckless action, but a carefully orchestrated demonstration of control. He moved strategically from position to position, unseen, guiding the situation to his advantage. When the gang attempted to regroup, they found themselves blocked by subtle traps and barriers Elijah had prepared. Their confidence faltered as they realized they were being monitored and manipulated, though they could not yet understand how. As the gang's frustration grew, Elijah finally made his presence known. He emerged calmly, a figure of controlled authority, revealing the skill and precision that had remained hidden for so long. The gang froze, unsure how a man they had assumed was a victim could be so composed, so deliberate, and so prepared. Using careful words and controlled gestures, Elijah communicated that he was aware of every action they had taken. He did not shout or threaten unnecessarily. He allowed the weight of his presence and the evidence around them to speak for him. The gang realized they had underestimated the man in front of them, and that realization brought a mixture of fear and confusion. Elijah began to disarm the situation further. He exposed evidence they had left behind, carefully pointing out their identities and actions. The gang's attempts to resist or bluff failed because he had anticipated every possible reaction. Each member's mistakes were highlighted, every misstep documented, and the situation remained under his complete control. He guided the gang members toward accountability, ensuring that authorities could intervene at the precise moment. This approach avoided unnecessary violence while ensuring justice was achieved. Elijah understood that true strength was not in chaos but in control, and every action reinforced that principle. Throughout the confrontation, Duke remained at Elijah's side, calm and alert. The dog's presence reminded the gang that Elijah was prepared in every way, with a partner who shared his discipline and focus. Duke's steady demeanor mirrored Elijah's own, reinforcing the unshakable authority the man now projected. By the end of the encounter, the gang was completely exposed and powerless. They had walked into a situation that had been prepared in every detail, and they realized their arrogance had led them directly into their own undoing. Elijah's composure, strategic planning, and controlled execution ensured that they faced consequences for their actions without unnecessary harm. Authorities arrived shortly after, guided by Elijah's careful coordination. The gang was confronted with both evidence and the undeniable fact that they had underestimated him completely. Statements were taken, confessions were documented, and justice was ensured. Elijah's approach had been precise, calculated, and completely effective. After the confrontation, Elijah took time to secure his home further. He repaired damaged areas, reinforced weak points, and ensured that his neighborhood remained safe. Though the immediate threat had passed, he remained vigilant, understanding that preparedness was a constant responsibility. Neighbors who had once doubted or feared him now saw a different side of the quiet man at the end of the street. They observed his calm control, his meticulous preparation, and his ability to handle danger without chaos. Their perspective shifted from suspicion to respect, even awe, as they realized the depth of skill and discipline Elijah possessed. In quiet moments after the ordeal, Elijah reflected on what had happened. He thought about patience, observation, and strategy, realizing that these principles had guided him through the entire experience. He did not act recklessly or with anger. He acted deliberately, ensuring that justice and safety were maintained. Duke lay by his side as he watched the sunset, a reminder of loyalty, calm, and the life he had fought to protect. Elijah knew that the gang's actions had revealed more than their own weaknesses. They had tested his patience and skill, and he had emerged unshaken in control and ready for whatever challenges might come next. He rebuilt not just his home, but his sense of safety and authority. Every day moving forward would be guided by the lessons of the confrontation: preparation, patience, observation, and precision. Elijah's life returned to a semblance of normalcy, but he carried with him the knowledge that he was ready for anything, a man whose calm strength and careful planning had turned a moment of danger into a display of unshakable control and courage. As the neighborhood slowly returned to routine, Elijah continued to observe quietly, maintaining vigilance without fear. He knew that the world contained unpredictable threats, but he also knew that his discipline, skill, and patience gave him the power to face them successfully. Duke rested at his feet, the bond between them a testament to loyalty and resilience. The street was quiet again, but Elijah remained alert, prepared, and unyielding, a man whose courage had been tested and proven in ways few could imagine. After the gang was taken into custody, Elijah felt a quiet relief settle over him. The immediate danger was gone, but he knew that vigilance was always necessary. He began to rebuild his home completely, this time with stronger foundations, reinforced windows, and secure perimeters. Each repair and upgrade was done with care, a reflection of his patient nature and his understanding that a home was more than just walls. It was a sanctuary of safety and stability. Neighbors who had watched the events unfold were now speaking with him differently. There was respect, curiosity, and a cautious admiration that replaced their earlier uncertainty. People came to offer apologies for underestimating him, acknowledging the calm strength they had witnessed. Elijah accepted their gestures politely, but did not dwell on the past. He focused instead on the present and the life he wanted to rebuild. Duke remained by his side throughout the process, loyal and calm. The dog's steady presence reminded Elijah that life was not just about surviving danger, but also about finding moments of peace. They spent long walks together, exploring the neighborhood and observing the small details of life that often went unnoticed. These walks became a part of their healing, a reminder of normalcy after weeks of tension and preparation. Elijah also took time to reflect on his own reactions during the ordeal. He understood that his strength had come not from aggression, but from patience, observation, and careful planning. He had remained calm in the face of provocation, used his experience to anticipate actions, and executed his strategies with precision. These qualities, he realized, were what had truly protected him and allowed him to regain control. As he continued to rebuild, Elijah focused on restoring the garden he had once tended. Planting flowers, trimming hedges, and maintaining the small green spaces became therapeutic. The garden, once damaged and neglected, began to flourish again under his care. It became a symbol of resilience, a quiet testimony that life could recover even after destruction. Every bloom reminded him of patience and growth, of the importance of nurturing both life and strength. The neighborhood slowly returned to its routine. Children played in the streets, neighbors chatted casually, and the sense of threat faded. Yet Elijah remained watchful. He knew that life could present challenges unexpectedly, and he was prepared to respond with the same calm and calculated approach he had used before. His vigilance was not fear. It was understanding and awareness, a way to ensure continued safety for himself and those around him. Authorities completed their investigations, and the gang faced the full consequences of their actions. Elijah's careful documentation and strategic handling of the confrontation ensured that justice was served without unnecessary conflict. The situation became a story that neighbors would speak of quietly, not with fear, but with respect for the man who had defended his life and property with intelligence and restraint. Elijah found solace in small routines. He continued his work, took care of Duke, and engaged with the neighborhood in quiet, meaningful ways. He helped repair minor damages in the community, offered advice on security, and provided a listening ear to those who had been affected by the gang's actions. Through these acts, he reinforced the sense of community while maintaining his personal boundaries and privacy. He also reflected on the lessons learned from the ordeal. Patience, observation, and preparation had been critical. He had understood the value of controlling his own reactions, of anticipating the actions of others, and of using strategy rather than force alone. These lessons were not just about surviving a threat, but about living with purpose, awareness, and integrity. Elijah realized that strength was often quiet, unassuming, and deeply thoughtful. The neighborhood's perception of him had transformed completely. They saw a man who was not only resilient but also measured and wise. His calm, composed demeanor became a symbol of strength that did not need to be loud or aggressive. Elijah had become a figure of quiet authority, someone who acted decisively when necessary, but always with control and foresight. As life continued, Elijah remained connected to the community while preserving his privacy. He attended local events quietly, helped with neighborhood projects, and continued to walk with Duke, always observant but never intrusive. People learned to respect his space, recognizing that his calm strength was a protective force not just for himself but for the entire neighborhood. In moments of solitude, Elijah often thought about the journey he had been through. He remembered the fear, tension, and uncertainty that had once filled his days. He also recalled the patience, strategy, and careful observation that had allowed him to regain control. These reflections reinforced his understanding that true strength was not in reacting quickly but in acting wisely, in preparing thoroughly, and in maintaining calm under pressure. He also considered the importance of resilience. The destruction of his home, the harassment by the gang, and the challenges of rebuilding had tested him in every way. Yet he had emerged stronger, wiser, and more capable. Every brick replaced, every lock reinforced, and every plant nurtured in his garden symbolized the restoration of both his home and his spirit. Elijah continued to live quietly, but with a renewed sense of purpose. He maintained vigilance, prepared for any potential threats, and used his experience to guide his actions. He had learned that life required both awareness and patience, that danger could be managed with strategy and calm, and that strength often lay in quiet, deliberate action rather than loud confrontation. Duke remained his constant companion, a reminder that loyalty, calm, and presence were essential parts of life. Together they continued their walks, observed the neighborhood, and enjoyed the small, peaceful moments that now felt even more valuable. These routines became a part of Elijah's healing and ongoing resilience. The neighborhood gradually came to understand the man they had once underestimated. They saw his quiet strength, his disciplined approach, and his ability to protect himself and his community without unnecessary conflict. Elijah became a symbol of resilience and